We're getting pink. Okay. Like, who are these?
And then everybody, before we start the recording, if you could make sure to mute your microphones for us, please, that'd be great. And Katie, it looks like you're recording.
I am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everybody today to our education session webinar. We have two great presenters here today, and I'll introduce them in a second. My name is Dorothy Lofton. I work at Oregon State University as an instructional designer, and I am the Presenter Services Chair for Accelerate this year. So thank you all for coming. I really look forward to seeing all the presentations this year, and I'm excited for the conference and excited to see what Megan and Doug have for us today. Megan is a learning designer with the John A. Dutton E-Education Institute at Penn State. Among her professional accomplishments, she is recognized for her work and as a lead instructional designer and project manager on Penn State's highly rated Epidemics MOOC. She was the pedagogical lead for the Penn State Digital Badges Initiative and supported the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences with their program evaluation and accreditation process. Megan currently serves in the role of program co-chair for the Online Learning Consortium's Accelerate Conference, and she is a 2017 graduate of OLC's Institute for Emerging Leadership in Online Learning. We also have Doug Geier with us today, and he is the Director of E-Learning and Instructional Design at Golden Gate University, where he leads the instructional design team and oversees faculty development opportunities related to effective online instruction and teaching with technology. In previous roles, he has held positions in educational software publishing and online learning as a producer, content developer, and instructional designer. Doug is an active member in the Online Learning Consortium as a volunteer and conference presenter. In 2012, he completed the OLC Institute for Emerging Leadership in Online Learning, and in subsequent years has served in a variety of capacities as the conference volunteer. This year, he's the program co-chair, along with Megan, for the OLC Accelerate conference. So, Doug and Megan, it's all you.
All right, Dorothy, thank you for those introductions and for getting us started. So, this might seem obvious, especially to a seasoned presenter, but the first step in creating and delivering a great education session is planning. It's generally not a good idea to entirely rely on your excellent speaking skills to deliver a successful presentation. So even if you're a seasoned presenter, planning ensures clarity and relevance and helps you stay on time and ensures that you cover all of the material that you want to cover. A good plan also considers how you will deliver your presentation and that best gets your message across while also meeting the needs and expectation of your session attendees. And so in today's webinar, we'll get started by first discussing how to plan for a traditional presentation, and then we'll also provide some additional tips for planning a panel discussion.
The first and foremost thing you need to think about when preparing your presentation is alignment with the proposal abstract. Many times we can forget to revisit the abstract when we start preparing our presentations. As a result, we promise attendees one thing in the program descriptions, but deliver something that can be completely different during the actual session. A good practice is to reference your abstract frequently during your planning process. The next key point is to develop an engagement strategy for your presentation. There is a significant difference between identifying a few places to ask the audience questions and developing an actual engagement strategy that facilitates learning. For Accelerate, our goal is to help you achieve the latter of those two. Doug is going to talk more about engagement strategies later on in our presentation. The next point is to think about timing. Identify each of your main points and topics and try to sketch out a time allotment for each of them. This will ensure you have enough time to cover all of your main points, and it will help you stay on track during your presentation. And lastly, avoid the unexpected. Think through every possible scenario that can go wrong and develop a plan for it. If your computer crashes, make sure you have a fellow presenter that is planning on bringing their laptop as a backup, or if your thumb drive with the slides on it gets broken, have a backup on Google. Think about adapters, power cables, everything that your presentation that could possibly have a margin of error associated with it, identify those potential catch points, and come up with an action plan.
All right, so I'm going to discuss with you some specific tips for panel discussions. You might remember that in previous OLC Accelerate conferences, panel discussions were their own session type. But this year we decided to include panel discussions along with the other presentations in education sessions. And so as there are some unique characteristics to panel discussions, we'll be discussing some of those specific consideration along with the others in today's webinar. And so at OLC Accelerate, panel discussions are defined as interactive, that's a very important word, interactive 45-minute sessions that provide a conversational forum that include panelists with diverse and varied viewpoints. Panel discussions typically contain one organizer, who is generally also known as the moderator, and up to 3 or 4 panelists. And so like a traditional presentation, a successful panel discussion seldom happens organically. A lot of thought and planning goes into them as well. And while we want to have a bit of flexibility and room for spontaneity in these conversations, having an outline of the main discussion points you want to cover helps you keep time and stay on point. And so one primary task in planning for your panel discussion is to develop a set of questions, and this is typically done by the moderator. Having some pre-developed questions will ensure a bit of continuity in the discussion, and you also want to ensure that your questions help to bring out the varied viewpoints and experiences of the panelists. And so from my experience, I recommend that you develop your most important questions and make sure that those get asked first. But then it's also important to formulate some follow-up questions. These can add more depth to the session, but also provide you with a bit of a backup plan, so to speak, in the event the audience is slow or hesitant to ask questions of the panelist as well. I find that it's also helpful to distribute your questions ahead of time to panelists so that they know what to expect and can prepare just a bit in advance. Beyond this level of preparation, however, I find it's actually not necessary or even desirable to rehearse or prep with your panelists. Over preparation and attempting to stick to a script, so to speak, only serves to decrease the organic nature of the discussion. So while the goal of the discussion is certainly to present some overarching concepts and perspectives, it's optimal if the discussion also generates some insights along the way. And I think this best happens if there's room for flexibility and spontaneity.
A well-designed slide deck will allow your attendees to more effectively learn and retain information from your presentation. On the flip side, a poorly designed slide deck will do the exact opposite. It will become a competitor for your audience's attention, thereby detracting from your message. In these next few slides, we're going to be exploring a few strategies for designing slide decks. And these strategies will help you achieve 3 primary goals. They will help you enhance the quality of your presentation. They'll help you ensure your slide deck supports your message, and they're going to help increase your audience's opportunities to learn from your session. We're going to start with text. It used to be a common practice to put all of your information on your slides and then read from them, but this isn't an effective use of the slides. By doing this, one of 2 things happens. Either you end up reading from your slides, in which case, why would anybody need to attend your session when they can just load the slides and then read them independently? Or it creates a dynamic in which your slides compete with you for your audience's attention. Your attendees will be switching back and forth between listening to you and reading what's on your screen, and this can create cognitive dissonance for them. When designing your slide decks, consider the golden rule: less is more. You can still use text, but use it sparingly. Use it to support your message by highlighting items such as section headers, key points, or quotes, like you see that we've done here. And you can make your text visually interesting by pairing 2 different fonts. Again, like we've done here, you can see the difference between our overarching concept on this slide and the subpoints. This creates a visual cue that separates the overarching topic of the slide from the content or the main points that you're going to be discussing. If you're interested in trying to use 2 different fonts, a quick and easy way to figure out fonts that will pair nicely together is to do a quick Google search. There are a number of sites out there that provide you with different font pairings. Also keep in mind the accessibility of the slides. Your font should never be below 30 point. It isn't just important for visually impaired people, but also for attendees at the back of the room, because they're probably not going to be able to see anything smaller than 30 point. And you want to make sure that everyone can enjoy your presentation. Since we're talking about the visibility of the slide deck, let's move on to graphics. Our brains remember information in images, not text. If you want your session to be memorable, use graphics to support your information rather than filling the screen with words. Aim for something that connects well with your content. If it's easy for your attendees to understand the connection between the image and your message, they will be more focused on what you are saying, and that's the goal. Incorporate images that are interesting but relevant. Try not to use stock photos, they're too basic. Find images that are unique or memorable. Maybe they're a little silly, or they provoke an emotion, or have an interesting connection to your content in some way. And if possible, try to come up with a visual theme for your presentation. I know that this can't always be the case, but if you can do this, it's going to be even easier for your attendees to remember your session, because essentially what it does is create a visual concept map for your audience as they listen to your presentation. So here's an example. I give presentations on managing your stage fright. My visual theme for the slide deck is classic movie monsters. And I always receive numerous compliments on my slides. And when I see people months later, they walk up to me and they're just like, oh, I remember this and this and this from your session, because the slides are so vivid and the connection is so strong.
All right, thank you, Megan. So far we've talked about planning and also about slide design using text, that sort of thing. And now we're going to move on to discussing delivery in your presentations. How you deliver your presentation is just as important as how you plan for it. So while good planning and attractive, well-designed slides are certainly a great start and necessary, you also need to consider how you deliver a presentation that is informative, meaningful, and engaging. So I like to think of this in terms of my stage presence. So by that I mean, how do you seem to the attendees? Consider whether or not you seem nervous, whether or not you're warm, curious, knowledgeable. You have a smile on your face. Consider how you also hook the attendees to want to listen to your story. And that's really what you're doing in your presentation, is telling a story, and maintain their attention throughout the presentation. And then also consider how you facilitate your session and ensure that you stick to your plan and end on time. In these next few slides, we'll discuss some key considerations for delivery of traditional education sessions as well as panel discussions. And then also move on to some special considerations for stream sessions, or those sessions that also allow for virtual attendance.
It is easy to give a good presentation. It is hard to give a great one. If you do a search on tips for giving good presentations, you're going to see a lot of things that most people probably already know. Tips like speak clearly, make eye contact with your attendees. But today, I'm going to share some strategies with you for making your presentations truly memorable. I want to help you take your presentation from good to great. And the first tip: don't give a presentation, create a conversation. Try to connect with the audience. Welcome them into the room, make them feel like they're a part of the session rather than just observers. If you do this, your session is going to be more dynamic, attendees will feel more invested, and it will be an overall richer experience for everyone. Next tip, use the space. Don't be afraid to come out from behind the podium and move around the room. It keeps your audience visually engaged. Now, this next one may not be as familiar to people, but it's a really important one. Optimize the learning. It's taking the conversation from, this is what I did at my institution, to a conversation of, this is what I learned, and here's how you can implement it at your institution or organization. By doing this, you're providing people with the value of your message rather than asking them to sift through all of the information to find that value on their own. Be accessible. Design your session so that everyone can enjoy your message. Select activities that everyone can participate in. Use the microphones to ensure that everybody can hear you. Make sure your materials are ADA compliant. I once had a professor say to me, if you can positively impact one student, then you've made a difference in the world. But what if the one person who wants to learn from your session can't because the materials are not accessible? If you have questions about how to make your materials accessible, please look at the OLC presenter services. Our chair here today, Dorothy Lofton, she's been working diligently on pulling these resources together for you. And I can tell you there's a lot of information there that you're going to find that's really, really helpful. And lastly, be passionate. You don't have to be silly or ham it up for your audience. Just be yourself and let your enthusiasm for your topic show. You'll be more confident, and most importantly, you'll have more fun. And if you're having fun giving the presentation, your attendees are going to pick up on that, and they're going to have more fun enjoying participating in your session.
All right, Megan, those were certainly some inspiring points, and I think a lot of that also applies to panel discussions. But in these next couple of slides, I'm going to provide you with some tips for moderators and some separate tips for participants as well that specifically relate to panel discussions. And so the main thing to keep in mind with panel discussions is that it's important to work together to keep the discussion moving. And so in that regard, there's some specific things for both the moderators and panelists to keep in mind. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to start off with some tips for moderators. So your primary job as a moderator is to drive traffic, excuse me, to keep things flowing and to make sure that everyone works together. This all starts with a solid introduction to the session. So in your introduction, make sure you welcome the audience, including the virtual attendees if your session is streamed. And we'll have some more specific tips for involving the virtual audience a bit later on in this webinar. Be sure to introduce your expert panelists as well. Provide a brief overview that includes their institution, title, any other points of interest about their background. And also, if you do have a few slides for your panel discussion, this would be some good information for your introductory slides. And then also in your introduction, it's also a good idea to frame your topic, provide a little bit of context so that you can set the stage for the discussion. And if appropriate, you might even consider presenting a poll question or a low-tech showing of hands to pique the audience curiosity and prime them for hearing more. Secondly, as a moderator, it's also your responsibility to make sure that the session stays on topic, doesn't run over, and that you provide ample time for questions. You also want to ensure that all perspectives are heard. So by this, I mean, you want to provide equal airtime for all the panelists and ensure that their viewpoints are equally represented. This, of course, is also the panelists' responsibility, and we'll touch on that on the next slide. You also want to make sure that you involve the attendees. So this is a discussion with the panelists and also the attendees as well to share their perspectives, their insights, and also their questions. And also helps maintain their interest. So make sure you set aside time in your session planning for this to happen. And incidentally, this goes for the virtual attendees as well. And Megan, in a couple of slides from now, will be covering specific tips for the virtual audience. And then finally, as the moderator, make sure you close with some key reflections from the discussion. And so as the moderator, you may want to provide your own perspectives on what you learned from the session or what it is that you'll be thinking more on as a result from participating in the discussion. And then you may also ask the panelists to provide a quick one last bit of insight, such as a forward-looking statement or prediction or some sort of summative statement of their topic and where they think it may be headed in the future. All right, and so some specific tips for panelists. As a panelist, you want to be sure that you work with the moderator. You want to make sure that you stay within your allotted time frame in responding to each question. There's an awful lot to cover in 45 minutes, and that time goes very, very quickly. That said, your points are clearly important, but on the other hand, because we are also very passionate about what we do, we often have a lot of information that we want to share. And so it's really easy, I find, to run over time in panel discussions. However, you want to keep in mind that other panelists have viewpoints to share, and so you want to make sure that you leave room for the others on the panel to share their perspectives as well. Secondly, you also want to connect your ideas with those of the other panelists. This is where panel discussions, in my opinion, they can get especially interesting, right? So connecting your ideas with others that you've heard and contrasting differences or sharing similarities can often illuminate key concepts or even generate some ideas for further exploration. In this way, the panelists benefit as much as they share. But of course, it's sometimes a fine line. So be sure that as a participant, your comments won't divert the conversation off topic. Also keep in mind that while it's great to have varying viewpoints in panel discussions, and we can all sometimes be very passionate about our viewpoints, it's important to keep a professional tone. And then finally, share stories and anecdotes that illustrate your unique perspective and assist you with getting your point across. Stories are always more relatable or interesting than just presenting data or viewpoints alone. Megan, the next.
Sorry, I realized I was muted. I apologize.
That's all right.
The next topic in our section on delivery strategies is focused on including your virtual attendees. If you're facilitating a session that's being streamed, your primary goal in designing your session should be providing a comparable experience for all your attendees. In other words, design with a virtual audience in mind. This can sound like a challenging task, but it can actually be pretty easy. Let's take a look at an example. A traditional question and answer session. What usually happens? The presenter asks the attendees if there's any questions from the audience. People pose their questions, but usually not knowing that they need to use a microphone in order for the virtual attendees to hear them. Presenters often forget to repeat those questions into the mic, and therefore the virtual audience ends up feeling disconnected or like they're an afterthought. Instead of a typical Q&A, consider using a software like Slido or Poll Everywhere, or even just a Google Doc. Some option that allows everyone to interact in the same way. This will allow everyone to feel included. Your attendees will feel more connected to your content. They'll feel more connected to you as the presenter, and they're going to feel more connected to the other attendees. And as an added bonus, it makes your session more accessible. It provides 2 different formats for people to acquire information. And if attendees need to resize the screens, they can easily do that because it's their screen that they're looking at.
Okay, and so to add to that, I'm going to discuss with you the ever important topic of engagement and interactivity in presentations. And so since you've submitted a proposal to OLC Accelerate, or I'm assuming you have, and that's the reason that you're on this webinar, is that you know how important interactivity or ways to engage your attendees can make all the difference between a good presentation and a great one. And so it's not only important to consider how you deliver your content or tell your story, it's just as important to consider how you'll engage with the attendees while you do this. So remember that the attendees come to your presentation because they want to hear about your particular challenge or research or project. And it's likely that they have some specific questions or perhaps even some insights that they could share as well. So carefully think about how you involve the audience. You might start by thinking on the experiences of the attendees or making some assumptions to start, and then how you might engage with them. But then as you move through the presentation or begin the presentation, for example, you might want to actually assess their level of knowledge, move beyond your assumptions and assess their level of familiarity or knowledge of the topic that you're presenting on before you begin. So for example, you might do this with some polling software or a low-tech show of hands. And then another thing that you can do to engage participants or your attendees is to ask questions. So asking questions of the attendees will draw out their varying experiences. This helps to generate conversation and ideas, keeps them interested, and then also prompts them to reflect on what it is that they've heard in your presentation. You might also ask them to share a few ideas or challenges that they're having that relate to your topic. And then finally, remember to answer questions as well. Of course, reserve some time at the end of your presentation to take a few questions and provide follow-up. And as Megan pointed out, remember to engage the virtual audience as well. All right, so we are starting to wrap it up, but I wanted to provide an important reminder about the session evaluations. We encourage all attendees to fill out evaluations for every OLC Accelerate session. This information is really important to us in planning future conferences. I can tell you that we definitely looked at the presentation data when getting started with planning for this year's Accelerate conference. And so we are asking everyone to be sure to add the evaluation reminder slide to your presentations and mention it to the audience during your presentation as well. This slide is emailed to all presenters, I believe, with a request to add it to their presentations, but it's also available as a download on the conference website on the presenter FAQs page. One other reminder is that the deadline for uploading your slide decks to the conference website is November 1st. This deadline ensures that your materials are available for people to download ahead of time or to help them follow along during your session. One big piece of feedback that we've gotten from the session evaluations is that in the past is just how much they value these posted materials and having them available both in advance and after the session. Okay, that wraps it up for me. Katie, this might be your slide.
It is, yeah, and
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of logistical questions coming in the chat, so this will give me an opportunity to answer some of those. I'm going to start out by saying, and I saw this in the chat also, that the rooms will be set up for a 16:9 slide format. That is kind of the standard widescreen format that everybody's TVs and computer monitors are these days. Unfortunately, if you're using PowerPoint, it seems to most often default to 4:3. So just keep that in mind. Everything is set up for 16:9. So as you're creating your slides, do your best to have the 16:9 format selected. It's not to say that things won't work with a 4:3 slide format. You'll just get those black bars on the sides, but everything is set up to work on the 16:9 slide format with HDMI connections. So as Doug was mentioning, we do recommend that you start and end your presentation, your slide deck, with the session evaluation slide, so that you are encouraging the attendees of your session to submit those evaluations. So in addition to the prizes that you may see in the image, for people who submit session evaluations, we actually also have a drawing for a presenter or session whose presenters have received the most, or at least 10 session evaluations will go into a drawing as well. So we do want to incentivize everybody to encourage people to submit their evaluations and for people to submit their evaluations. There will be wireless internet within the conference space. That being said, as Megan had mentioned previously, we always recommend it's a good idea that you do have a backup of your presentation somehow that does not rely on the internet, just in case. While we don't anticipate any difficulties, things happen so that are beyond our control. So there will be hallway monitors within each hallway, so that if you have an AV or a tech issue of any type, you can flag down one of the hallway monitors, and then they will either flag down one of the AV or IT people who also roam the hallways, or get a message to me, and then I can get a message to the AV or IT teams to go to your room and help you. Please, just a reminder also, all presenters do need to bring their own laptops to present from. We are not able to provide laptops for all of the presenters or anything, so it is up to you to bring your laptop or your device to present from. I did see a question. The connection laptops use is HDMI, so if you do not have an HDMI port, please make sure you bring an adapter so that you can connect to the HDMI cables. And we will have a handful of adapters on site that you can check out of the lending library at the registration desk. However, you know, it's a first come, first serve basis. So we do urge everyone to bring their own adapters if they need them. Primarily, the rooms are set up with round tables that are set in what we call crescent rounds. So, you know, the two front seats that would have their back facing the screen and the presenter would be not set, and then there's 8 chairs around the round table in a crescent shape. So that is the way that most of the rooms are set up. Most of the rooms also have a podium and a head table for 3. So in the event that you do have a panel or something like that, there is room for 4 people up at the front there. Rooms usually have microphones. It depends on the room size. If it's a small room, then it might not be necessary, but typically there will be a mic, and if you have multiple presenters, please anticipate that you may need to share microphones. Again, we urge you to repeat any questions asked by the audience using the mic, if there's a mic in your room, so that everyone can hear. This is especially important in
thing about this conference I'm going to.
Okay. Sorry about that. I just muted that individual. So it's especially important in those presentation rooms that are streaming to repeat the questions into a mic so that the virtual audience can hear them as well. You can find out if your presentation is streaming by looking at the presentation listing on the website. If it's streaming, it will indicate that, and there'll be a little kind of satellite dish icon. So not everything is streamed. It's just a selection of presentations. We have a total of about 100 presentations that are streamed, while we have closer to 450 to 500 total presentations. So just do check your program listing to see if you are one of the sessions that is being streamed or not. We also urge you to upload your slides or link your presentation and upload any handouts to your conference to the conference management system. This I'll send it an email later this month with instructions on how to do that. But this is really important for our attendees. We have probably 2 or 3 primary complaints that we receive through the session evaluations consistently, and one of them is that the presenter didn't upload their slides or handouts to their session page. And so this helps the people who are attending your session and want to follow along or want to go back and reference things. It also helps people who may have had to choose a different session to go to during that time block, but they're still really interested in your session and they want to go back and learn the information from your session as well. It's especially, again, important for those virtual presentations because the virtual audience can look at those materials as well, especially if they have any visual issues and need to be able to enlarge the screen or anything like that. So I cannot urge you enough to upload your slides or handouts or link your presentation to the conference management system. The due date for that is November 1st. However, we do recognize that people are working on their presentations up until the last minute. So you will have an opportunity at any time to go back and re-upload a new file. So, you know, you don't have to worry about, oh gosh, you know, my presentation, I have to have it all finished by November 1st. You can always go back in and remove that file and upload the new file. Another way to do it is you can always put in a link to, for example, a Google Slides or a Prezi or something like that, and then those will automatically update. So there are ways around that. For those people who are in streaming room presentations, we do have a session chair who will be in the room, and they will be seated at a table with a computer, and they will act as the liaison between you on site and the virtual audience. They will have a chat box open, and they'll be able to ask, the virtual audience will be able to ask questions and through the chat, and then the session chair will grab the mic and repeat the question to you to answer. So, and they will also kind of take the role in just being a liaison and conveying to the virtual audience anything that might be happening in the room that they might not be aware of, you know, such as if there is some type of mic issue or something like that, they can type into the chat box, you know, presenters just sorting out an AV issue or a tech issue, we'll get started shortly, those kinds of things. So that's what the role of the session chair is in the room, to help to assist you to communicate with that virtual audience. You may want to just touch base with your session chair ahead of time if possible. I know often they are running from session to session, but you know, just plan to arrive a couple minutes early, introduce yourself to your session chair, and if you have any specific, you know, plans or anything, make sure you discuss those with them. You will want to know that your mics are live, so the virtual audience will be able to hear any sidebar conversations that you may whisper or anything like that. So just be aware that the mics are live, and if you have one close to you or wearing one or whatever type of mic is in your room, you will want to make sure that your conversations are kept on topic. And then there was a question as well about the video. There is no camera in the streamed session rooms, so it's just audio and whatever you are displaying from your laptop onto the presentation screen. So you won't have a camera following you around or anything, but it will capture everything from your mic and everything from your laptop. Yeah, as Christine mentions, the general session room where the keynotes are is the only room with a camera. Angela was asking about the virtual audience engaging in Q&A. If you're asking the audience a question, again, make sure that it goes into your mic so that they can hear it, and then they'll type their answers or something into the chat box and the session chair will interact with them. The other option that I highly recommend is some sort of interactive software such as Slido or Poll Everywhere or something like that. That makes it very easy for the virtual audience to participate in any circumstances in which you want to ask questions or poll the audience. So that's something that we definitely encourage. Yep, Slido works. Like I said, Poll Everywhere, anything like that. You know, is a great way to engage that virtual audience as well as the on-site audience. I will go back through the chat, but it looks like Christine was answering things in the chat. But if you have any questions about any of the content from today's webinar, including, you know, the things I was just going over in terms of logistics, please feel free to grab the mic or type into the chat box, and we would be happy to answer any questions you would have.
While we're waiting for the first questions to come about, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and a special thanks to Doug and Megan for all of their expertise you shared with us today, and another thanks to Katie for all of the setup of the room's information too. It's extremely important as well.
Thanks, Dorothy. I wanted to go back into the chat just a little bit. Diane asked if slides include a reveal, do they need to be uploaded in advance? So my recommendation there, Diane, would be to maybe have two versions, one version that you upload in advance and then go back after your presentation and switch that out for your final version.
Katie, do you want to go over the virtual presenter situation if somebody has a virtual presenter, how that works?
Sure, I can certainly do
Amy's
that.
asking.
Okay, yeah, I was sliding up through the questions to make sure we hadn't missed anything, but I will go back down. So if you have a virtual co-presenter, you know, our policy on virtual co-presenters is that we do permit them. They must be registered as a virtual attendee for the conference. So while we cannot necessarily provide a lot of support for, you know, technical support, what we do recommend, what we've seen work really well, is everyone who has a virtual co-presenter, there needs to be one presenter on site to manage the on-site components, right? So what we've seen really well is bring your virtual co-presenter in via whatever your conferencing method is of choice, whether it's Zoom or, you know, Skype, or, you know, whatever your method that you're comfortable with and that your co-presenter is comfortable with. So then you would just bring them in through your laptop to do their their part of the presentation or to participate. Sometimes we have situations we've seen where somebody wants a virtual co-presenter to just kind of help facilitate questions. They can hop into that chat room that the streaming session has and help answer questions that way. We've seen that work really well also. Hopefully that answered your question. If you have a specific question about how virtual co-presenters might work, please grab the mic or let us know.
Katie, it's Christine. I was just going to add, if you have a virtual co-presenter, it's really important to, one, make sure you're all on the same page as far as the time zone. All sessions are presented at this conference in Eastern time zone, so that's what they're listed as. That's probably the number one problem we run into is co-presenters trying to log into the session at the wrong time. And the other thing is just make sure that everybody, you're all on the same page as far as what technology they're joining in with, whether it's Skype or Adobe Connect or whatever your preferred method is. Make sure that you've got that. We have a list of people that are registered as virtual co-presenters. We'll let our tech team know, and typically they'll try to swing by the room and just make sure that you're not having any problems before it starts. So can't guarantee it, depends on what's going on and if there's emergencies, but they definitely have the list and they try to do that.
I'll also add in there that make sure that you're ready to present by yourself, just in case the technology just isn't working with the virtual presenter.
Great point, Dorothy. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about pulling through Zoom or other things. So we use MediaSite to stream the sessions. MediaSite, the instance that we have, it does not have an interactive component, right? So your session is basically being live streamed and recorded as is. So we have installed a chat bot for each of those presentations that are on the streamed schedule. And so it's a separate chat bot. It pops up in the window when you open up when the virtual attendee opens up the streaming window for that session. And so any questions or anything like that, chat can happen in that chat bot. If as a presenter you want to poll the virtual audience, my recommendation there, the best way to do that and have both virtual and on-site audiences participate would be something like Poll Everywhere, Slido, something like that. As don't rely on the chat bot. It is strictly chat. It doesn't have polling features. So pull in whatever third-party app that you prefer and are comfortable with in order to get accurate polling from both of your audiences.
Katie, I'll add too that for the virtual sessions where people are using, virtual attendees are using the chatbot, that's where the session chair comes in really helpful. The person, they're typically sitting in the back of the room, they're monitoring that chat window. And so I think it's really helpful as a presenter to introduce yourself to the session chair before your session begins and just discuss how you might want to handle questions as they come in.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. And Angela, no, the chatbot doesn't have interactive features. So again, if you want to have those interactive features for your preferred method of engagement, I would recommend using a third-party app that everybody can participate in, including your on-site audience. That way you get the on-site audience to be able to respond to those as well. So, and then I saw another question as well. If you have additional questions after this webinar, please feel free to send an email to presenter services at onlinelearning-c.org or conference@onlinelearning-c.org, and we would be happy to answer any additional questions that you might have. Check the presenter FAQ, check the presenter services webpage. There are a lot of answers, a lot of information on those two resources.
Do we have any other questions? Looks like Wade wants to know if we'll send a link to the recording. I know that the recording will be posted on the presenter services website, and Christine just confirmed that absolutely it will be.
Yep. So normally what I do is, so it takes a little while for the recording to render, and then I pass it on to marketing to upload to our YouTube channel. We will link to the YouTube video from the presenter services webpage. I will also basically update the Google Calendar invite with the link to the recording, and then send everybody a calendar update with the recording link. So that's how we'll do that. You'll be able to access it from the calendar, from the presenter services webpage, or by visiting the OLC YouTube channel and looking for the Accelerate 2019 Presenter Services playlist.
All right, is there anybody else who has another question? We want to make sure to respect everybody's time. All right, I don't see any more coming in, and I see a lot of participants dropping off. So Doug, Megan, any last minute comments?
My only comment, Dorothy, is that I'm very excited to attend the conference, and it's seeming a lot more real now that we've gotten all these questions from presenters, right? And so just very excited to attend and see what you're all going to be presenting. So thank you for attending today.
Just to echo what Doug said, every day that we have some meeting or some event associated with the conference, it just gets, you can just feel the excitement building. It's wonderful. So we look forward to seeing all of you. And by the way, feel free to walk up to us, Doug and myself. As Dorothy mentioned at the beginning of the conference, we are the program co-chairs this year. So we would love to get to meet you face to face and talk with you and just get to know you better. So please come say hi.
All right, thank you to you both. And we hope to see everybody there, and have a great rest of your day.
Everyone.